Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Back to the United States now, and despite a chorus of criticism, much of it from his own Republican Party, President Trump has doubled down on his tough new immigration policy, which has seen thousands of children separated from their migrant parents at the border. In a speech in the last hour, Mr. Trump accused the media of helping smugglers and traffickers, and accused asylum seekers of hiring professional lawyers to give them false stories. His opponents say the policy is an affront to the decency of the American people. Fatima Manji has this report.
This is the sound of zero tolerance. Children separated from their parents in a US detention camp. The secret recording was released by a civil rights lawyer to investigative journalists at ProPublica. The distressing sounds of children crying have heightened the backlash already begun in reaction to these disturbing images. More than 2,000 children have been separated from their parents as they attempted to illegally cross into the US. Zero tolerance means the parents are arrested and the children housed in warehouses like this one. In Washington, a clear demand.
Let the children go. Say it with me. Let the children go!
This is the first of many planned protests. The yellow bands, an act of solidarity. The very same are tied around the wrists of parents when separated from their children.
Children are off limits and nobody should be silent. This is not okay, it's unacceptable, and it has to stop.
This country is built on immigrants. I'm a grandson of an immigrant, and this is just a horrific policy.
And these aren't just your usual anti-Trump voices. Many are religious conservatives who voted for the president.
As a mother, it's horrifying. And frankly, as a Republican, I think it's horrifying. I mean, we're the party that's always stood up for family values, for keeping families together.
From the streets to the studios, such is the outrage that a former CIA director even likened the policy to Nazi Germany.
I walked down that railroad siding where the families were separated, and that's why I used that picture.
This is the Attorney General's defense.
Well, it's a real exaggeration. Of course, in Nazi Germany, they were keeping the Jews from leaving the country. But this is a serious matter. We need to think it through, be rational and thoughtful about it.
Rational and thoughtful, not this president's style.
People that come in violate the law, they endanger their children in the process, and frankly, they endanger all of our children.
Mr. Trump has blamed the smugglers, the Democrats and the Mexicans for the situation. He says he's dealing with illegal immigrants trying to infest the country.
Not with me. We're taking them out by the thousands. We're taking them out by the thousands.
The Trump administration has claimed separating children from their parents is merely following the law. Not the case, says this legal expert.
That's an absolute lie. While the law is that they are being held for immigration purposes, they would be with their families. They're using the criminal charges as a means and a method to separate them without giving them all of the protections that the criminal law gives them, including due process, the right to sit down with an attorney and actually discuss their case. So they've taken all of that away and forced them into this particular position.
A chorus of condemnation has begun to flow in. The Mexican government calling it unacceptable, the UN human rights chief adding his criticism. But perhaps more worrying for Mr. Trump is the dissent from Republicans. The governors of Maryland and Massachusetts are now refusing to deploy the National Guard in protest.
I think it's cruel and inhumane, and we told the National Guard to hold steady and to not go down to the border, period.
So just what level of backlash will it take for Donald Trump to back down?
Now, President Trump has shown once again that criticism, if anything, makes him all the more determined. Far from retreating on his controversial policy of splitting up families who try to get across the Mexican border without any paperwork, he insisted the only alternative was opening American borders to everyone. More than 2,000 children have been separated from their parents in the past few weeks.
The outrage is only growing. These images of detention facilities where children are being kept in cages, having been separated from their parents, has created a sense among many Americans that this is a defining moment for this country's core values. An audio recording from inside one of those Texas detention camps captures the cries of children calling for their parents and the responses of their guards.
Bueno, aquí tenemos una orquesta. ¿Y tú?
The children that are in the custody of the United States of America in these baby jails and camps and tents in the desert need to be given back to their parents immediately. I heard the audio yesterday and it literally makes me sick. The little girl is 6 years old and she is begging.
Let the children go!
There have been protests not just in Texas, but in Washington as well, with many activists demanding that Congress pass a law that prohibits border agents from pulling children from their mothers' arms, a practice being used when undocumented migrant families are crossing the border. The president today showed no sign of backing down, saying the only alternative to family separation would be to accept mass illegal migration.
Under current law, we have only two policy options to respond to this massive crisis. We can either release all illegal immigrant families and minors who show up at the border from Central America, or we can arrest the adults for the federal crime of illegal entry.
The president is portraying his stance as a love of country, saying that without borders there can be no America. But one man who knows this issue well and who ran the US immigration agency under President Obama says Trump is gravely weakening America.
You can be tough at the border, you can enforce the laws, but you don't need to detain people, and you certainly don't need to rip mothers from or babies from their crying moms' arms in order to do that. But I agree, I'm outraged by this decision, but I guess I'm not shocked.
There is immense, almost unanimous pressure from Congress for Trump to reverse his position on separating families. The Republican Senator John McCain called the White House policy an affront to American decency and contrary to the nation's founding principles and values. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Well, perhaps it was pictures of those migrant boats in the Mediterranean that led President Trump to harden his own line on immigration, declaring he would not let the US become a migrant camp like Europe. His response to separate migrant children, including toddlers and breastfeeding babies, from their parents on the Mexican border. A tape reportedly of crying children shrieking their parents' names has forced an outcry over a move that seems as senseless as it is inhumane. Joining me now, Camila Jayapal.
¿Y tú?
Guatemala.
No llores. Vas a llegar con... Mira, ella te va a explicar y te va a ayudar. ¿Cierto, Consul?
Te va a pasar con su consulado, ¿no? Papá. Voy a llamarme a mi tía para que me venga a recoger. Ay, no. Y después para que llegue mi mami lo más pronto posible.
Those children, we understand, from the cages on the detention camps. Well, joining us now, Pramila Jayapal, the Democratic Congresswoman from Washington State, who Politico magazine calls the leader of the resistance on that. Do you think, Pramila Jayapal, thank you for joining us, do you think, to borrow Melania's words right now, America is a country that governs by the heart?
It is certainly not governing by the heart. Thanks to the Trump administration. This is an outrage. And As a mother myself, I can tell you, to every mother, to every father that is there, listen to those cries. Think about a baby in your arms being separated, being torn away from you as she is breastfeeding. I met with women whose children as young as 1 year old were taken away from them. They never had a chance to say goodbye. They never had a chance to explain what was happening. They don't even know where their children are. This is not a country governing with heart. And I say to President Trump that he has brought us shame in the United States, that these things could be happening on U.S. soil.
President Trump, as you know, says he's enforcing the country's, in his words, horrible laws. Jeff Sessions has actually laid the problem right at Congress's door, saying if we pass legislation to end the lawlessness, you won't face those terrible choices. In other words, it's up to you.
It is such hogwash. Everybody, including Laura Bush, former First Lady, Republican First Lady, has said that this is a result of the zero tolerance policy that Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump and Stephen Miller put into place. None of this tragedy would be happening without that zero tolerance policy. And so for Melania Trump or Donald Trump or anybody else to suggest that Congress needs to do work, they are just missing the fact that Donald Trump repeatedly creates crises and then tries to blame it on somebody else. He's using immigration just as red meat to a shrinking minority of his base, and even his biggest donors are now crying out and saying, this is absurd, this is outrageous, you must reverse these policies. He can do that with a snap of the fingers. But he can pick up the phone right now and put an end to this suffering.
I think you heard our last guest from Germany. You see what's going on in Europe, and Trump has made no secret of the fact that he thinks Europe has failed on the immigration issue, that it's one big migration camp, and he is trying to warn America against turning into that.
Well, I very much appreciated your questioning, because I think that there is this desire to stir up fear based on false narratives. That, you know, the idea that crime goes up when immigrants come into the country, that has been disproven here. You cited the statistics in Germany that clearly show that that's not the case. And Trump is increasingly calling immigrants animals, calling immigrants an infestation. Today he said, we don't want to infest the country. These are not just subtle, these are very bold cues to a kind of, frankly, fascism that we have to we have to make sure we are resisting.
But the bigger question, the fundamental question for Democrats and for your party is why this is going down so well with many people in America. You are, to be frank, out of fashion. The liberal elite, they can say, has been asleep at the wheel and didn't realize how much harder immigration was making many people's lives.
I actually think that we are winning this debate. 77% in the latest poll, 77% of the American people believe that this policy is wrong, that it is immoral, and that it needs to be stopped. Franklin Graham, a big fan of Donald Trump, the son of Billy Graham, evangelical preacher, former evangelical preacher, has said this policy needs to end. The Koch brothers have said that. Laura Bush has said that. This is not some, just small liberal elite in some city on the West Coast or the East Coast. These are the American people who are mothers and fathers who literally are thinking about the fact that they can't imagine how anything would make this a defensible policy. So I think that is why Trump would love to turn this focus to something else, but the focus is on him and reversing this policy.
Congresswoman Jayapal, just before you go, there's a story that's breaking now that the United States has withdrawn from the Human Rights Council, from the UN Human Rights Council, accusing it of a chronic bias against Israel. And this is from Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, slamming Russia, all the rest of it. I wonder what you make of that move, pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council, and where you think it leaves America now.
Well, unfortunately, the United States has ceded its global leadership. and has moved increasingly to an isolationist country. That is not who we are. We've always been proud of our global leadership role, but we've seen this coming for some time. And I think that even though the Trump administration knows full well that the UN Human Rights Commissioner is not part of this, it's a different entity, this is in many senses payback for the fact that the UN Human Rights Commissioner has said that what we are doing with this zero tolerance policy is actually in violation of the rights of the child. So this is a statement to be made. Frankly, it's not that much of a surprise. Trump has pulled out of the Paris Accords. He's pulled out of all kinds of international conventions, treaties, agreements, whether it was the Iran deal. He has thumbed his nose at the idea of multilateral collaboration and coalition building. That is very unfortunate. What we need today is for the United States to resume its role as a global leader and to really make sure that we are continuing that. Unfortunately, that is not what the administration is doing, and I think that's a detriment not only to the rest of the world, but certainly to the people of the United States of America.
Pramila Jayapal, great of you to join us this evening. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.